Would you describe for me the relationship between impulse, intuition, and connection to source?
We would say that intuition and connection to source are on the same wavelength. All of them could be, but there's a difference in impulse, and we'll come back to that. In other words, when you are in alignment with source and that call of source is calling you and you have that feeling of wanting to go there, that's alignment. It's possible, however, for you to have been beating the drum of unwanted things and to hook into a stream of consciousness in mass consciousness that is other than the call of source that could evoke an impulse from you. In other words, if someone were to sock you in the nose, your impulse would be to sock them back, but it would not be inspiration from source.
So the qualifying ability to discern an impulse that is aligned with intuition and connection to source is how the impulse makes you feel?
Exactly. And so now we would say connection to source is always the downstream thought. An impulse could be either one. If it feels good, it's a connection to source. It's a downstream thought.
In the situations where a person is in despair and their impulse is vengeful, and it is a downstream thought for them, what would be the...
Do you follow that? That's really interesting because some of them are not hearing it. So let us just take a very brief moment. But if you are in a state of fear and you are reaching for a thought of relief and you find a feeling of revenge coming over you, even though society would condemn you for your feeling of revenge, especially if you act upon it, that feeling of revenge is a relief from the insecure feeling of fear or depression that you were feeling before. So take it where you were going.
Okay, so then the key would be the experience of the impulse is a relief. The action of the impulse, however, if I'm understanding you, would revert back to a disconnect. If intuition and connection to source are aligned, impulse can go either way. The impulse of vengeance can be a relief from fear or despair. The action of vengeance, that impulse to act, would not necessarily promote that relief.
Well, here's the thing, and we'll talk about this in detail when we come back from segment of refreshment. But if you are seriously looking for feelings of relief and you're reaching for the next and the next and the next, you may very well move right through the feeling of revenge before you act on it. If you move into a feeling of revenge and you are faced with a society that says that's bad, that thing that you are doing, or the words that you are speaking are inappropriate and you should not act out in that way, then you may very well move back into fear. And so what happens when a person moves from fear to revenge, from fear to revenge, from fear to revenge, from fear to revenge, is they activate such a pattern there that they sort of stay there until they begin acting that out. And once they begin acting it out, now we don't even see it as a problem if, in other words, what you feel, you speak. What you feel, you speak. What you feel, you speak. And it really wouldn't be a problem if you're feeling terrible and speaking it and then feeling less terrible and speaking it and feeling less terrible and speaking it and acting it and feeling less, because very quickly you're going to move into a place of improvement. But it usually doesn't work out that well, because it's a rare person who can run the gamut of negative emotion into positive emotion without running into people who are observing them from the outside and having response to their behavior and then putting them in detention.
Or their internalized voice of people outside.
Well, they learn it from their exposure to life. In other words, most people are, everything that we're doing in these gatherings, the emphasis that is at the basis of everything that we teach and what we are wanting you to teach those that you are interacting with. The basis of it is we want you to begin listening for the call of source and to tune everyone else out. And parents and teachers and parole officers aren't happy with our message. In other words, we want so, because it isn't until you tune the others out that you can really begin to hear this consistent call that will lead you toward everything that you are and everything that you have become. But it is a little tricky as you are so intertwined with one another. Most people offer the majority of their vibration in response to what they are observing. So, and you're right, most people develop their complete impression of themselves from feedback that they got from others. So if you have a mother who is tuned in, tapped in, turned on, and connected with source and love, and she holds you as your object of attention, you're getting a really good basis of life. You're getting a really good whiff of the way your inner being feels about you. But if your mother is having all kinds of her own problems, and she's out there raw and ragged, and she's not connected to source, and she's holding you as as her object of attention, then the feeling that you're getting about yourself is that you're not all that good, because you're undoubtedly seeming to do all kinds of things that are upsetting her all the more. And these interpersonal relationships are so convoluted. In other words, you get in a room of people and ask them to talk about their past, and before long you just want to die as you hear all of the things that you do to each other that make each other feel the way you don't want to feel. And we just know there's no way of sorting that out. You just cannot unscramble your past. You can't go back and make your mother be different. You can't go back and understand what she meant. You can't go back. You can only stand where you are and listen for the call of source. And when you listen for the call of source, that's the impulse of all impulses, you see. And when you make that your habit, when you make that your mantra, when you make that your moment-to-moment goal, you come into alignment with who you are, and then everything else comes into alignment.
There is a story called the Mayan prophecy. I don't know if you're familiar with it at all, but one of my favorite translations indicates that as the energy moves faster and faster, and the cycles of their calendar represent that, we are reaching the culmination of a new age and moving into the mind of intuition as a consciousness, and they even give a date, February 2010. Now, assuming the accuracy of the 100th monkey theory, which I'm also curious to hear you talk about, assuming that we actually are moving forward as a consciousness into the arena of intuition, which by our definition now is synonymous with connection to source, I would just be delighted if you could articulate either a process that you've already given us or a new process that would assist us in accessing an understanding of the impulse that will guide us from intuition and towards increased intuition.
Well, really, everything that we've been talking about relative to this downstream is that, isn't it?
Yes.
And the question is a wonderful question, but we want to remind you that every person who is making the movement is making it from their unique place. And it is always interesting to us when someone places a target on a calendar and pronounces that that will be the precise time that everyone gets to a place, when everyone's not even reaching for the same place.
Exactly. Hence my curiosity.
Well, there is not anything wrong with looking forward to times of enlightenment, or to times of harmonic convergence, or to times of awakening. In other words, we just want you to realize that you are eternal beings who are eternally expanding. And we are not so excited about putting these artificial guideposts as we are in helping you to understand that you are individually carving out your own experience, and that you don't have to wait for anyone to catch up for you to become one who is completely in alignment, and all of your behavior could therefore then be inspired. we do believe that that would be the optimum experience.
Yes.
To be in a physical body, aware of who you really are, appreciative of the contrast that causes you to expand, aware that there will always be a gap from the most recent expansion and where you stand, and eager about the journey from one place to another. If what so many are talking about could ever be, which is this time of closing the gap, then it would be the ending of all things that will not end. So we think you are putting it into a particularly good framework. What you are acknowledging is that you are an eternal expander, and you are reaching for processes that will cause you to consciously begin to close that gap. And we have to say everything that we spew is toward that same end also. So when you say you would be delighted, and there is nothing more than that we like more than you to be delighted.
Oh, thank you.
In what way might you delight yourself?
I would truly delight myself to be able to apply the term you just used, inspired action. Nothing thrills me more than when I feel that sense of inspiration flowing through my being.
Yes. Now, what are the precursors to inspired action? In other words, what is it that is calling you forward, that is responsible for the inspiration? What is that? It's the expanded being that became expanded how?
Through experience.
And through contrast.
Yes.
So let's not get too excited about only being in the place of inspiration when the contrast is what puts the thing there to which you are being inspired. You follow what we are getting at?
I follow it from the perspective of our before the break conversation, where the idea of an impulse that could be vengeful and would be a contrast experience for me, but would still be inspired if it was taking me from fear or
and
despair.
So in that sense, everything is. That's what you've just given us is another version of you can't get it wrong and you never get it done.
Right.
And so we were just wanting to soften what you're reaching for a little bit, because it sounded a bit like you want to get so good at tuning into who you are that each and every action that you offer forevermore would be an inspired action. And we say, don't sell short the traipsing through the contrast which causes the continued expansion. And so now this really leads us to something that we've been wanting to say in all of the time that we've been together since we've been aboard this ship. And that is, we want you to be at ease with the entire process of creation. In other words, of course, we want you to practice the art of allowing, but there isn't anything wrong with mixing it up and getting clear about what you want. It's all part of the process. And now you have the conscious understanding of the difference between an upstream thought and a downstream thought. So now let's take this a little further. Do you believe, from what you know, that from time to time, upstream thoughts help the downstream creation?
The upstream thoughts send out my rockets of desire.
Yes. So is there any real problem with writhing in a little discomfort, as long as you're aware what the discomfort means? In other words, that's the whole point. We are not wanting you to rid yourself of negative emotion. We are not for a moment wanting you to think that every thought you think must be one of those downstream thoughts and constantly closing the gap. We want you to understand that life is this ballet of exposure to experience which births the desires, and you can get really, once you get this whole picture in your mind, then you realize that from that standpoint, it's all inspired. It's all inspired because you came into this experience knowing there would be contrast and wanting it, eagerly wanting it, because you knew that it would give birth to the expanded version of you. It all works together, doesn't it? And isn't it interesting? Don't you sometimes really like it when something really gets your goat? Isn't there something really intoxicating about something being so provocative that it just makes you more alive? Don't you find yourself wanting to be informed about some things that really stir you up? Just don't get carried away with it. In other words, don't get so far over here that you can't easily get back over here. That's the key.
Right.
You want to give birth to the rockets and move toward them, and give birth to the rockets and move toward them. But there is nothing wrong, and dear hearts, we know you well. You like the drama.